But let me start with how my interview with the Prime Minister last night has exposed major flaws in his advocacy for an Indigenous voice. His Yes campaign is being criticised even more widely now after some problematic answers from him last night and some pointed follow-ups today. Let's start with this exchange about possible referendum outcomes. Tell me, if the referendum were to fail, would you go ahead and legislate a voice anyway?
I will follow what Indigenous people said. This is a process that began in 2012. There were 5 years of consultation leading up to 2017, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people meeting at Uluru and coming up with the statement that they wanted.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, but we understand the process.
Statement of reconciliation.
If it failed, would you legislate a voice anyway?
I'm not contemplating failure here. What I'm doing is being as optimistic as the Australian people are themselves. This is an opportunity to unite the nation, Chris.
Yeah, he didn't want to answer that question, did he? As I said on the show last night, surely he should have said that he would respect the wishes of the people. You know, if the referendum fails, then he'd respect the outcome and not then legislate a voice regardless, even though he has the power to do so. Actually, I communicated that view directly to the PM after the interview. I didn't think his non-answer would fly. And sure enough, this morning, in his next interview with 2GB's Ben Fordham, this weak link was targeted immediately.
And I note that last night on Sky News with Chris Kenny, I might just kick off with this one. He said, if the referendum was to fail, would you go ahead and legislate a voice anyway? Now, you wouldn't answer that question. I think it's important that you do, because otherwise people will be wondering, why are we going to the ballot box anyway?
Well, one of the things that I'm not doing is leading with a position that assumes a loss of a referendum. That would not be a very sensible thing to do.
Again, that was a non-answer, wasn't it? So Fordham, of course, kept going.
If Australia says no, you're probably still going to say yes.
No. What I'm trying to do here is to do what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have asked for since 2017. There was a process leading up to the voice.
But in 2023, you're asking us to say yes or no, and you won't confirm whether or not you will follow that judgment by the Australian people. If Australia says no at the referendum, you may still say yes. You may still legislate it.
No, you're confusing rugby league and rugby union here. If Australians say no, then there will be no constitutional change.
Now, some are reporting this as the end of the matter, saying that was the PM saying he'll accept the outcome. That's not what he said at all. He just said if the referendum fails, there would not be a voice enshrined in the Constitution. Well, that's a statement of the obvious. The question remains open. Would Anthony Albanese and Labor still then move to legislate a voice? I think the PM needs to rule that out. Otherwise, the referendum would be seen as farcical to many, and certainly Albanese would look like he's prepared to disregard the will of the people. Peter Dutton picked up on this too.
Is he saying to the Australian public that if you vote no in the referendum, that he will then legislate the next day to bring it in? If that's the case, well, pass the legislation now and demonstrate to Australians how it can work.
OK, so this is very messy. This is a big controversy for the Voice campaign, and the PM needs to sort it out. But then there's the not-so-small matter of detail that I also raised last night. But if the referendum succeeds, you'll have to legislate a voice. You'll have to provide detail, provide laws that decide who can nominate, how many people will be on the voice, how a national voice will interact with the state voices and all the like. Surely you have to put out some of that detail, either a draft bill or some key fundamental guidelines before you put the referendum to people.
And those details in terms of The broad principles will be out there for all to see, Chris. There's already enormous detail out there. Well, it's not my proposal, Chris. It's something that comes from directly involving people who are involved in this.
Okay, so this is an issue too, has been for a long while actually. We know the constitutional amendment is the most important detail, we've got that the Parliament and subsequent parliaments could then shape the voice or revise it any way they see fit. But voters need to know how Labor would construct it. They need to know some basic detail on how Labor plans to legislate a voice should the referendum succeed. At the moment, the government is leaving it all open, when they should be explaining it and perhaps negotiating it with the opposition. But because there's this vacuum on detail, we get nitty-gritty questions like this one from Ben Fordham.
So will members of The Voice be paid?
There's no suggestion of that, Ben.
Really? No suggestion that Voice members will be paid? Well, as you know, I was involved in work under the previous government to help design a voice, work that is now publicly available to everyone in a report that Labor says it broadly supports. And it directly addresses the pay issue. On page 131, in a paragraph about the co-chairs of the National Voice, it says they would be full-time paid roles to recognise that the leadership would need to be available when required. And on the same page, it says the other members of the National Voice would have a part-time role, covering their time attending national meetings and doing other work related to the Voice. It doesn't specifically mention those are paid part-time roles, but that's the clear inference. So there you are. On that key aspect of detail, the PM was wrong. It proves, of course, that there is a lot of detail available in that report. Sure, I've been saying that all along. But the point is we need to know which bits of all these recommendations and options Labor plans to implement, which it will leave alone, and what other ideas it might throw in. The bottom line is that if you want people to support the Voice, you must entrust the public with more detail. Yes, critics might make mischief with every additional aspect that's put into the public domain, but that's the stuff of public debate. It's simply wrong to insult the public by suggesting they can't handle the detail. I don't think you can pass the Voice just on the vibe of the thing. The government needs to share a practical model of just how it proposes to make it work.